I'll give this opportunity now to Yake Kwinana. Yake, also a chartered accountant, is the chairman of Kwinana Equifin, a firm that she founded in 1999. Yake also sits as an audit committee chair of a number of what I'll call few risky clients, but we will allow Yake to then share some of her own experiences. Thanks.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am going to approach risk management from the audit committee point of view. Basically, the risk management in terms of the audit committee is derived from 3 guidelines, framework, or the standards. The King 3, Principle 3.8, Cause of Framework of 2004 Enterprise Risk Management, and 2009 ISO 31000 Risk Management Standards. And I will go on as to who is responsible for risk management in terms of all those 3 guidelines or frameworks, and the roles and responsibilities, who's specifically responsible for risk management, and 10 considerations for a successful enterprise risk management, and the conclusion. King 3. How does this work? Right one. Oh, thank you. King 3 basically is saying that the responsibility for risk management rests with the managers themselves, and the board is basically responsible for the oversight function. And the board delegates this function to the audit committee or risk committee, depending on the structure and also on the size of the entity. And therefore, the audit committee would report to the board on the effectiveness of the risk management. And whether this function is carried out at the risk management committee or at the audit committee, what is important is that that should be added in the charter, be it the audit committee charter or the risk charter, so that the risks are managed, and that should be in the scope of whatever committee that you think this one fits in respect of your entity. The King 3 talks about the risks, all the risks basically, be it financial risks, operational risks, strategic risks, IT risks, HR risks, and basically all the risks as Louis has properly and adequately articulated. And the risk register should be reviewed at least on an annual basis. And it is reported quarterly in the audit committee, at least quarterly, because aligning the risks in terms of reporting with how often should the audit committee sit, where the audit committee should sit at least 4 times a year. In all these meetings of the audit committee, risks should be added. And in fact, what we expect in terms of the risks, we expect them to be rated in terms of adequacy and effectiveness, and we also expect the controls in respect of those risks that have been identified. And also the controls need to be tested for adequacy and effectiveness. And again, more importantly, the audit committee needs to report on the effectiveness of risks in the annual report. And therefore, it is important that the risks are taken care of by the audit committee. And that is basically in terms of the King 3 Principle 3.8. And also, we as the audit committee members need to make sure that there is the weaknesses in the financial controls. Basically, the weaknesses is when the risk has in fact materialized, and therefore now it's no longer a risk, it's something that has happened, which basically is the weakness. And that weakness should also be reported in the audit committee. Other risks that also Louis did mention that I'm going to emphasize is also the fraud risk, where basically management needs to make sure that they do have the whistleblower facilities to make sure that they do make sure that even if, for instance, you do not want to be identified, you are able to report any potential risks or weaknesses. And also it encourages also the employees and people from outside to report the areas that they feel are not comfortable with. The other risk that I'm also going to emphasize, which was also stated by Louis, is the IT risks. These days, we live in a high-tech environment, and those IT risks basically do affect the financial reporting. And also, as the audit committee members, we need to make sure that the financial reporting that is done by management, the risks thereof have also been taken care of. And therefore, basically, that's the responsibility of the audit committee as far as risks are concerned. In terms of 2009 ISO 31000 risk management standard, basically it's saying risk management is not a standalone thing. It is an activity that must be embedded in all the policies and procedures of the business. And risk management, it also states that it's the function of management, as we have said. And whenever the board discuss strategies, they should always be considering the risk, and therefore it's just an integral part of the business. In every decision-making process, you need to make sure that you consider the risk. I like the 2004 cause of framework. The 2004 cause of framework is very specific as to who is responsible in the organization for risk management, and it is the chief financial officer. Having said that, the chief financial officer sitting in his office will not be in a position to manage the cleaner in the kitchen. And therefore, that's why it is important that risks should be embedded in the organization. And everybody in the organization must be aware of his or her own risk that he needs to manage. Like, for instance, a cleaner, it doesn't mean that if the CEO is responsible for the risk, a cleaner is not responsible for the risk. That cleaner is responsible to make sure that our environment is clean. Otherwise, that is the risk that he needs to take care of. And in the event that we are not operating in a clean environment, that means we are not managing the risk. And who is the person who's better positioned to do that is the cleaner. And therefore, what it means is that everybody within the organization is responsible for management of risk. Sometimes you find that in some organizations, people would think that the risk officer is responsible for risk management. The risk officer supports the organization, and therefore he or she is not the only person responsible for risk management. As I said, everybody is responsible for risk management. And then we would say who is basically responsible for optimizing performance. The reason why we are talking about performance here, not just moving a little bit away from the risk, is that if you look at what the organization is all about, the organization is about performance. And why are we managing risk is because we want to maximize our performance. And therefore, that is basically the direct correlation between optimizing performance and also risk management. And you would want to find out what is the responsibility of the CFO if I am saying risk management is the responsibility of the CEO. Basically, because just about almost all the risks that we are managing boils back to finance, be it strategic risk, be it operational risks, and also our reason of being part of the business, basically, is to maximize profits, and also in terms of government to ensure sustainability, which basically revolves around finance. And therefore, the CFO could be taken as the risk champion, and it is expected to play a very important role in risk management. And basically, if there is anything that will make, or any organization that will go down, you find that it's because of the finances, and therefore we cannot really run away from the fact that the CFO needs to make sure that he or she champions the risk. But for us as the audit committee members, we are not going to go to the CEO, to the CFO and say, how are you managing the risk? We are sure of the fact that the person that we are going to ask that question is the CEO, and therefore every other person, the CEO needs to make sure that he or she manages his risk. And therefore, if for instance we look at the roles and responsibilities, much as I have started with executive management here, if you look basically at the organizational structure, you will first look at the board. And in fact, even before that, in government, you will look at the accounting authority, which is your shareholder. And then you look at the board. And then after the board is the audit committee, which basically is the subcommittee of the board. And then you go to the CEO, CFO, and then you go downwards. And therefore, for us as the audit committee members, we have a responsibility to make sure that we carry out our oversight function on behalf of the board, and then we report to the board. Hence, you find that also the other key person is the company secretariat, because he or she needs to make sure that when he plans his diary in terms of the number of meetings and when the meetings should be, the company secretary needs to make sure that the audit committee meetings happen before the board, because we need to report to the board on the activities that we feel need to be escalated there too. And therefore, the executive management should make sure that they carry out the functions of the CEO, because we do get the information and also confirmation of risk management from the CEO. And as I said, the compliance officer is making sure that they support the cause. And operational personnel, I have already stated that everybody is responsible. But in terms of accountability, the CEO is accountable thereof. And then in terms of considerations and the factors to consider as the audit committee person responsible to make sure that risks are managed, you need to really check your assumptions and make sure that these assumptions are adequate and are implementable and are reasonable. You need to always be vigilant in terms of the risks. And as Cindy said, I have been the member of very risky businesses where you do not sleep at night. But if you do not sleep at night, you need to make sure that also your CEO doesn't sleep at night. Basically, in terms of risk, you need to know how do we respond to those risks. And all the people that I have highlighted, starting from the shareholder up to your lowest person at the lowest level, we need to know how do we respond to the risk, and in case those risks materialize, what is it that we have to make sure that we respond appropriately and adequately. And therefore, we need to verify the information and also anticipate failure and also the cause of failure, because basically from those failures, that's where we can learn going forward. And then we need to manage the key connections. Maintain a high margin of safety, set the enterprise time horizons, and we need to take enough of the right risks, because there are good risks, there are bad risks. We need to take enough of those right ones, and then we need to sustain operational discipline. And basically, that's all I can share. And another thing that also Louis did mention, considering the fact that the audit committee sits only 4 times in a year, what it means is that you need to have a strong risk officer, you need to have a strong CFO, you also need to have a strong chief audit executive, because those are the people basically who support us in our absence, and therefore those people are very, very important for our success. Thank you very much.